David, that sounds bad. I don't know about this. David, that sounds bad. David, that sounds bad.
So yes, this is probably the dumbest idea I've had for a 5 composers video so far. To get a sense of just how dumb, try to think about what music making is all about. For the most part, it's about being in a room with other musicians and communicating back and to, being in the same space and feeling and breathing the music. But of course, for the past 18 months or so, being in the same room as another musician has been a lot harder than usual. Now, my friend Mark Mandarano is a conductor, and one of his jobs is to conduct a university orchestra in McAllister College. And of course, during the COVID lockdown, none of his musicians were able to play music together. They were all stuck at home or in their dorm rooms. So Mark got in touch with me and he asked me, can you think of anything we could do with this lockdown orchestra? And for some reason, rather than trying to compensate for the challenges of lockdown, I decided to double down on them. We've already got a situation where each individual player is going to be recording their part separately. So why don't we give the composers the challenge of writing a piece where those individual parts can't even be synchronized later? So let's allow broad stroke indications like play this pattern after 10 seconds, but no click tracks, and any metronome marks should be just as a rough guide. And this will definitely be a challenge. So imagine, for example, that you're writing a violin line. Well, we've got multiple violins, so you have to know that if you write a single line, it's going to be played by maybe 5 violins, all playing slightly different speeds, so the line will become a bit of a blur. And then if you write a bass line, it might not fit exactly where you expected. They might play it faster or slower. How do you compose in those circumstances? If communication is key to most music making, these are going to be pieces of music where there's no communication at all between the players. Like I say, probably one of the dumbest ideas I've ever had. There was even some doubt in my mind whether this could really be called music at all. There are some examples of pieces of music that are unsynchronized. For example, this piece by Morton Feldman. 4 pianists are given the same set of chords and then told to play them in their own time. Feldman himself apparently enjoyed taking half an hour or more to complete them. And then there are graphic scores by composers like Cornelius Cardew, and even the piece in C, which I looked at on the channel before, has the synchronization of a pulse, but the players are free to work through the ideas at their own speed. But all of those pieces are designed to be performed by musicians sitting in the same room, listening and reacting to each other. In our case, we won't have that, so we've taken something that's already quite experimental and made it even more so. Nevertheless, we decided to give it a shot and go ahead, and I asked some great musicians, June Lee, Bec Plexus, Ben from 8-Bit Music Theory, and Jeremy Blake from the channel Red Means Recording, each of whom went away and scratched their heads trying to figure out how to write a piece with this kind of setup.
This is not going to work.
So incredibly strange or strangely incredible, how did the pieces turn out? Stay tuned at the end where I'll give you my overall thoughts, and we'll also hear from the orchestra's conductor Mark. Do let us know in the comments which pieces you think worked best, and I'd also love to hear any creative solutions you have for this kind of composing challenge. Thank you very much to Mark and the students at McAllister College Orchestra, who I hope are now back face to face making real music all in the same room. Each of our pieces lasts about 1 minute, and first up it's Jeremy Blake.
Hello, my name is Jeremy. I'm from a YouTube channel called Red Means Recording. I was asked by David to work on this, and it was a really cool challenge, and I want to talk to you about what I made and what came back. So with this concept of phase that was going to be inherent to the individual instruments playing these in isolation, I thought it might be kind of cool to create a relationship in the composition itself that would allow for a at least harmonic relationship once they got out of time. So what I did was I used this sort of motif, this arpeggiated motif with multiple parts at different timings, so that even if they hit a note that didn't really belong in that time, it would still sound good. And when we put these together, we get this. So you can hear, even in my version of this, that there is a sort of, cycling relationship with the notes. It's a lot of how I end up composing for modular when I'm dealing with more generative sequences. After I made that up, I added some flute. I'm like, we need a lead voice. And as a former flautist, I was like, okay, I think I can probably write a lead line for flute. These are all contact instruments, by the way. I got a little bit through it and I realized that I was missing some low end, so I decided to let a bass sound come in. Now, bass in this context, because there isn't a chord progression on top, is going to really change the relationship we have with the concept of our tonic note, which means that however this bass was going to come in the real recording of this was going to have an effect on what happened on top. And I wanted the top to be sort of having its own permutation and the bottom to have its own permutation. And then finally, at the end, I was like, let's do some trumpet. But you'll notice there's a relationship between that and what the flute did. Again, I'm not a classical composer, but I had some ideas on how to present this to the orchestra in a way that I thought might end up kind of cool. So after I wrote my piece, to get it over there, in case anyone's wondering how this worked out, I had to translate my my Ableton session to sheet music. So I exported each one of the individual tracks as a Midi file. And then I went into this program called MuseScore. And I imported the individual parts and had MuseScore translate the Midi to sheet music. And then I did my best with what I know about scoring and sheet music to try to make it a little bit readable. This was definitely an interesting challenge. It's been a long time since I've looked at sheet music. You can see here that I added some leg, and so that's very good. This is the leg section. So let's check out what I got sent back. David sent back all of these files. These are all individual takes, and there might even be more that I didn't include in here. I was in the impression that, like, oh, when you get this back, all you can do is line up the beginnings of things. And I was like, okay, let's check that out. David, that sounds bad. I don't know about this. I didn't understand that he meant we could move things to the beginning of where they were actually supposed to appear in the phrasing. David was awesome, and he did a little mix of this for me and sent it back, which was much more listenable. So let's go ahead and check that out now.
I named the piece Maybe Chaos because I just had no idea how chaotic it would actually be. Since the members of the orchestra could not listen and coordinate with each other, I thought there had to be something that connected the players together, and to me that was harmony. I thought if there were different rhythmic ideas happening at the same time in all different instruments, then it would sound like a train wreck. So what I did was I divided the piece into 3 different sections, with each section including a vertical harmony, usually in strings, and different individual melodic lines happening over the harmony. I think everyone had to deal with an unusually high level of uncertainty here. It's a very different environment for everyone involved, I imagine. And for me, like, it's kind of terrifying to not have the level of control I would usually have over what I write. I guess that's it.
this piece, I tried to come up with how I could coordinate these musicians, but without using click track, and also without letting the timing loose entirely. So I had to come up with ways to guide them in time without making it entirely strict. So there are 3 ways that I used to do that. For the strings, I used cues. So they have in-ears or headphones on, and they hear little sonic signs, like could have been a sound like that. But I think I just used like a tick of a drum or something in their ear. And then they knew that if that cue came, that they had to play the following notes. By doing that, I guided the strings through a variety of chords, and they became this progression. The second approach I used was for the winds. Also them I asked if they could put on headphones, but in their headphones I had a guide melody. All the wind instruments had to play the same melody, but I asked them to individually follow the melodies, but then I wanted them to slightly too slow play along with that melody. So I hoped that because of that you would hear this uniform melody spread across all kinds of wind instruments, resulting in this like big cloud, kind of a smeary melody thing. The third approach is the approach for the soloist. In this piece, the soloist is the guitarist. I just gave them a cue to start, again on the headphones. But after that, I just gave them a written part and just said, go with it. I called it Void.
Hey everyone, it's 8-Bit Music Theory. My piece is called Pedestrian Tones, and I had a lot of fun writing it. It was really interesting trying to solve the problem of how to write for an unsynchronized orchestra, but my kind of core theme, the core way that I tried to solve that problem, I guess, was to give all the players choice, not as much choice as I could, but a decent amount of choice. So I was inspired by, and that's code for I ripped off the Beatles' A Day in the Life, where they had an orchestra and they wanted a big orchestral, crescendo. And what they did is they told each player individually, start on this low note and end on this high note. We'll cue the start and the end, but however you get from point A to point B is your problem. So what ended up happening is you have this huge cacophonous crescendo of noise, almost like white noise, because there's so many different individuals doing different things. And all kind of building together in this wild way. And then it climaxes into this big 2D chord altogether. So it's like this chaotic, swirling, crescendoing mess that all of a sudden comes together in this beautiful consonant chord. And, if you're going to rip something off, why not rip off the best piece of recorded music ever, right? So I took that idea and tried to spin it out into different ways. So the winds might have a figure, all of them. And I'll say, play this figure 3 times in the first 30 seconds of the piece, and leave all of the decisions about tempo or volume or articulation up to them. And in the strings, you'd have each part has a couple different notes to choose from at any given moment, with notes saying like you switch between these 2 or 3 notes whenever you want, but play out of this pool. I wanted the texture to kind of emulate a crowded room almost, or noise on the street, where you have a lot of individuals doing their own thing, making their own noise, having their own conversations, and you don't really hear what any individual person is doing, but all of that noise adds up together into this the sound of the crowded room or the street or whatever.
So for my piece, I used 2 techniques which I actually use a lot in a slightly more controlled way in my more fully written out pieces. Firstly, I used melodic lines which overlap in a sort of canon. These are quite modal lines and quite close together, so it's like a few notes just noodling around. And I've always felt that works well even in notated music, so I thought I'd try that here. Secondly is to do with harmony. If you imagine that you have 2 chords, but because of the unsynchronized performance, you know that the notes of one chord will bleed into the next. So as long as you're aware that's going to happen, you can create this moment of tension as the 2 chords overlap, and there's a sort of quite dissonant harmony there for a while. So I do this with a few chords, and then the final chord I use is consonant. It's actually just a G major chord. So the previous chord will gradually fade away, and you're left with this G chord just with a violin trill on F sharp and G at the top. So I knew that as the instruments fade out, you'd end up with just 1 or 2 violins just trilling away, and then finally closing the piece on that top G.
David, that sounds bad. David, that sounds bad.
I think we can all agree it's been a pretty weird 18 months, and for most musicians, not an experience we're keen to repeat. But I found this experiment fascinating because it showed something of what is taken away when we can't be in the same room making music. But perhaps more importantly, it showed what's still there. Just like the ear is always drawn to the sound of the human voice, even when it's practically drowned out by an entire orchestra. So what I think these pieces showed was that even when we ludicrously expanded the challenges of lockdown music making, and even with a compositional brief that denies some of the most fundamental aspects of what music is all about, the human connection behind each of these pieces still, I think, shone as brightly as ever. And that, for me, is something quite inspiring. Now, an important aspect of being creative is about taking risks, and I'm really grateful to all of the composers for being brave enough to experiment in direct view of thousands of people here on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed following along with us on this journey. If you'd like to see some of the scores or hear the composers' own reactions to their own pieces, I'll be posting that over on Patreon, and thanks to everyone who supports the channel over there. Thank you also again to Mark Mandarano and the McAllister College Orchestra, and I'll leave you with Mark's own thoughts on the experience.
Wow, well, I would say it's amazing how these composers could take these guidelines and their personality is going to show through even through this strange medium that we're using, individual recordings that are all stitched together in the end. Very different moods and really interesting. Very proud of the musicians. Very proud. Well done. You overcame, right, all this distance and all these challenges in order to give world premiere performances. Awesome. So thank you.